Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're tracing the absolutely wild, turbulent journey of Donald Trump. We're going to follow his path from a rebellious youth straight through his years as a real estate mogul, a television star, and ultimately a history-making two-time U.S. president. Okay, let's dive right in.
To wrap our heads around this incredibly complex life, we're going to break it down into 5 key eras. We'll look at his roots, the real estate empire, his TV fame, the leap into politics, and finally, that historic presidential comeback. All right, part 1, roots and early years. Let's look at where the Trump family actually started.
The American side of this story actually kicks off back in 1885. Fleeing mandatory military service in Germany, his grandfather Friedrich arrived in America at just 16 years old, right during the gold rush. Talk about a bold move, right? That laid the groundwork for Donald's father, Fred, born in 1905, who really built up the family's incredible real estate wealth. And that sets the stage for 1946, when Donald John Trump was born into a highly affluent household in Queens, New York.
Now, growing up wealthy didn't exactly mean a quiet childhood. Donald was pretty notorious as a rebellious, difficult kid. I mean, the sources note he threw stones at neighbors, bullied classmates, and get this, even collected illegal switchblades. Because of this extreme behavior, his father sent him away to the strict New York military academy at age 13. But this was a total turning point. It's where he learned deep discipline and actually ended up becoming a cadet captain.
Moving right along to part 2, building a real estate empire and taking over the family business.
So coming out of the Wharton School of Finance in 1968, he steps into his father's business, but with massive, massive ambitions. See, his father, Fred, was focused on practical, middle-class housing out in Queens and Brooklyn. But Donald, he aggressively pushed the Trump Organization straight into Manhattan. He wanted to be the biggest name in the most famous city in the world, building these opulent luxury projects. Think the Grand Hyatt and Trump Tower.
Which brings us to part 3, television fame and controversies. He didn't just want to build buildings, you see. He wanted to build a larger-than-life personal brand. He completely transformed into a massive pop culture celebrity. We're talking movie cameos in Home Alone 2, heavily involving himself in the WWE, literally shaving the head of executive Vince McMahon in 2007, and of course, hosting 14 seasons of the hit reality show The Apprentice. This whole era really cemented his influence on modern media.
And you can't talk about that show without mentioning the iconic catchphrase, "You're fired." It sounds simple, but that phrase effectively cemented his public persona for millions of Americans. They weren't just seeing a real estate developer anymore. They were seeing a tough, uncompromising, totally decisive executive who was always calling the shots. Now, during this huge rise to fame, his heavily scrutinized personal life kept him right there in the tabloid headlines, alongside his business deals. He was married 3 times. First to Ivana from 1977 to 1991, having Donald Jr., Ivanka, and Eric. Then to Marla Maples in the 90s, having his daughter Tiffany. And finally to Melania in 2005, with whom he shares his youngest son, Barron.
However, that highly publicized personal life also triggered some severe legal controversies. Most notably, an illegal $130,000 hush money payment was made to adult film star Stormy Daniels. This went through Trump's lawyer, Michael Cohen, just before the 2016 election. And as we know, this payment eventually led to a historic guilty verdict, marking a massive legal storm in his career.
Okay, on to part 4, entering the political arena. The big pivot from celebrity to commander-in-chief.
When Trump entered national politics, he brought that aggressive, unapologetic television style right along with him. He employed what political analysts call the madman strategy. So what is that? It's a calculated tactic where a leader deliberately acts unpredictable, like they're willing to do absolutely anything to win. The goal is to make opponents feel totally off balance and dominated. Trump used this heavily to show he wouldn't play by traditional political rules.
And honestly, this highly unorthodox approach succeeded spectacularly. Officially jumping into the race in 2015, he rallied massive crowds with the promise to make America great again. Running hard on border security and the economy, he completely stunned the world in 2016 by defeating Hillary Clinton. Becoming the 45th president, he focused that first term on tax reforms, job creation, and tightening up the borders.
And that leads us into part 5, a historic presidential comeback.
His first term wrapped up with a really turbulent election loss, largely shadowed by the COVID-19 pandemic. The sequence of events here was staggering. First, he lost the 2020 election to Joe Biden. Second, he refused to concede quietly, making widespread, unproven claims of election fraud. And third, this all boiled over on January 6, 2021, when thousands of his supporters violently breached the U.S. Capitol building, literally halting Democratic proceedings for hours. At that point, a lot of people thought his political career was totally finished. But he launched a fierce comeback campaign for 2024, and it was dramatic. He actually survived an assassination attempt at a rally, kept fighting, faced off against Vice President Kamala Harris, and, against conventional odds, secured a historic victory. With that, Donald Trump officially became the 47th president of the United States. With this decisive win, he etched his name in history once again, completing a political resurrection that very few saw coming. To really put into perspective how rare this is, he's only the second person in all of American history to serve non-consecutive presidential terms. The very first was Grover Cleveland, way back in the late 19th century as the 22nd and 24th president. Well over 100 years later, Donald Trump joins that incredibly short list as the 45th and 47th.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final thought. When you consider this unprecedented trajectory, from a rebellious New York real estate heir to a massive reality TV star to a deeply polarizing figure and now a non-consecutive commander-in-chief, how will history ultimately view the legacy of Donald Trump? It's a fascinating question and one we're probably going to be debating for generations. Thanks for joining me today and keep learning.